Hello and welcome back, or welcome if you're new. If you're new here, my name is Elena. I'm the homeschooling mama to 3 kiddos, and here on the channel we talk about everything from homeschooling to homemaking, all the things in between. As you can see from the title, we're going to talk about what I read in February. So I'm going to go into my Storygraph app and see what I actually read for February. I don't feel like I read that much, but I read 15 books. So that's a pretty decent amount, I would say, especially for a shorter month. The first book that I read was from the library, and I've already returned it. It was Aisha At Last by Uzma Jalaluddin, I think. I apologize. I don't think I ever get the artist names right, or they are artists in their rights, the writers, the authors. I read Aisha At Last as part of a reading vlog that I did, and I will link that up in the cards for you if you want to catch that and hear some more of my thoughts on that. But I had the librarian pick out a couple of books for me to read for my February TBR. And I honestly, at the time when I recorded that, I thought those were going to be pretty much just the few books that I read for the entire month. I really didn't see myself reading quite as many this month. Aisha At Last, though, it was a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but there was a lot more that happened in there, and it wasn't an exact retelling. There were similarities in some of the characters, but there were other events that started happening, and at one point I felt like there was too much happening in that book. That book to me was okay. It really wasn't one of the favorites that I had from the librarian. The other two books that the librarian picked out for me was In Good Company by Jen Turano, and that was actually the second book in a series. The series is called A Class of Their Own. This book is a fiction historical romance. That's how it's listed. The main characters are Millie and Everett. Millie is a nanny who can't quite seem to hold on to a job, and Everett is he's not a single dad. Well, he's a single adopted dad. His dear friend passes and leaves his 3 children in his care. And so Everett finds himself suddenly in charge of 3 children who don't like having a nanny, and he can't keep a nanny. So it seems like it would be the perfect arrangement where Everett and Millie she could work for him and be his nanny, but Everett does not want Millie to be the nanny, and Millie is rightfully upset by this, and she says, I would never be the nanny to your children because of the way that you envision that I am. Eventually they do, of course, their paths cross, and he needs to hire Millie, and the story goes from there. There's also a little bit of a mystery involved in having to do with the friend's death. And so this book I thought was really, really good. I didn't feel like I was missing anything as far as it being like the second in a series. I should check my library and see if they have the first in the series, because I did really enjoy this book. Again, if you want to hear more on the ongoing of it as I was reading it, I'll list the, you can refer to the reading vlog. But this book was a good book. It was lighthearted in the way that at the end of the book you feel like it tied up a lot of things in a neat bow. Like I said, it is a part of a series, so let's see how many more books are in this series. There's 3 books in this series, and the next part, it looks like the next book in the series follows another character that's first introduced in this second book. So the first book probably is, the first book has to do with a different character that was in the second book, but each book is to do with a different character, so you could pick them up on their own and read them separately if you wanted. Again, I really enjoyed this book. In fact, I gave it 4.5 stars on Storygraph, so I would recommend this if that seems like a type of story that you enjoy reading. And then the third book that the librarian picked out, wait, was there 3 or 4? There were 4 books the librarian picked out for me, sorry. The third book the librarian picked out for me was Unearthly. It was the first in a series, and it is by Cynthia Hand. This one follows a teenager who finds out that she is a quarter of an angel. Her mom is half angel, so she was born of an angel and a human, and then that leaves her daughter being a quarter of an angel, her daughter and her son. And the story is about the daughter, and she sees these visions, and that's supposed to be what her purpose is. So the family moves has to move because this vision takes place in a different place. They move, and the story is just kind of about what her vision is, how is this going to happen, what is she supposed to do, because she just gets little snippets of it. Along the way, we meet other characters in the school that she joins. She starts to try to learn a little bit more about what it means to be part angel, because her mom will only give her so much information at a time, and she wants to know more. This book, I felt like it really is the first book in a series in that it just kind of set the scene, and it introduced characters, and it didn't tie itself in a neat bow. It didn't end in a way that I felt satisfied with the ending. It was a decent book. I always feel bad when I like really don't enjoy a book, but it was a decent book, but it is the first in a series and just kind of lays the groundwork for the rest of the series. I didn't pick up the second book in the series. It looks like there are 3 books, and then there are 2 like small novellas in between. One, it looks like, is just 4 pages long. So it's just a lost scene, it looks like, that's in there. So there are 3 more books. Maybe another time I'll pick it up, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Or it's not on my radar to happen anytime soon. The last book that the librarian picked out for me was... So the last book the librarian picked out for me, I actually finished in January, but I picked up the sequel to that book and read it in February. So in January, I read 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim, and then the sequel to that, The Dragon's Promise, which is the second book in the series, also by Elizabeth Lim, is what I read in February. I really enjoyed this book. I liked the first book clearly enough to pick up the second book. The second book follows along our adventure. In the first book, you are introduced to a princess, and it opens with her being prepared to be married. It is an arranged marriage, and she flees. She has 6 brothers, I believe. Yeah, 6 Crimson Cranes. She has 6 brothers. In her land, there used to be magic, but it was outlawed, and it is not allowed anymore. And we find out that the princess has some magic, and because her father is the emperor, this is very, very dangerous, because anyone with magic was killed. And so her stepmother finds out that she has magic, and she turns her 6 brothers into cranes and then curses the princess. And so now no one recognizes the princess. She's just kind of gone missing is what they think. And that's the basis of the first story. In the second story, we continue on because her adventure is not quite completed. I will say the first story, it does end, but it leaves with a cliffhanger. And so you could just read the first one and put it down for a while. The second one picks up the second part of the adventure that you didn't see coming. So the second part of the adventure has to do with dragons. There is dragons mentioned in the first one, but in the second one, you're more so see their world, and the princess needs to return a pearl, which is the dragon's heart, to a certain dragon, and they think it belongs to a dragon since only dragons have pearl hearts. But as the story goes on, you find that this is not just any ordinary dragon, of course, and the kind of pain that this dragon has gone through and is going through. And I just felt like there were a lot of different layers in there, and it was a really great kind of intro to a fantasy world. I've dipped my toe into fantasies. I feel like I just read like beginner fantasy books though. So that was the next book that I read in February, and I really enjoyed that book. Now, one book that I did not enjoy was 30 Things I Love About Myself. This was by Radhika Sanghani, I believe. This book was for a book club, and so that is why I finished it. Otherwise, I really would have DNF'd this book. It was not something... When it first started, I thought this was going to be a good book, but then as it went on, it just got more painful for me. This book starts with Nina Mystery, and she is in a jail cell, and it is also her 30th birthday. So clearly she does not plan, this is not something that was planned, this is not how she foresaw her life, and it was kind of, what I thought it was going to be was one of these really great stories where the character finds what really is important to her and what she wants out of life and how she's going to go about getting it. And it does sort of do that, but it just kind of takes you on an adventure, I guess, that is just not really the normal style books that I read. There are things about the book that are endearing and that you can relate to. There are also some serious topics that it handles. She has a mom that is a very strict Indian mom, so if you've ever had like a strict parent, there are a lot of parallels that you can see happening in there. Her mom does say a few really harsh things to her, which can be a little tough at times to swallow. Her brother lives with her mom, and her brother is depressed, and so it follows that too, and really touches on his story, which I thought was done really well. The parts that I had more trouble with was when Nina goes on her, I guess, self-discovery adventure. There were some things that were just like really way out there for me, and I just couldn't get with it. So if you want to read this book, beware, this is probably a little bit of a spoiler, but at one point Nina considers marrying herself, and like I said, if I wasn't reading it for a book club, I wouldn't have finished it. Flopping back to a book I really did enjoy, I picked up The Amish Cookie Club. It is the first in a series as well. I read a lot of beginning series books this month, but it is by Sarah Price, and I picked this up as a digital read. To kind of just read in the evening hours. That's what I had been doing a lot. Was the beginning of the month I was reading on my phone in the evening. I switched it up towards the end of the month, but that's when I was reading this. This was a digital book that I checked out from our library, and there are a group of women that meet to bake cookies for their Sunday service every week. So they're moms, and they get together, and the story is actually, it touches on the mom's point of view as well, but it's mostly about one of their daughters. One of their daughters is very outspoken, and she just, if she sees something that could be bettered, she is not afraid to voice it and say it. And sometimes that is not always welcome advice. And so because of her inability to maybe tame her tongue, sometimes she loses quite a few jobs, and her parents are just at a loss at what they're going to do with her and how is she gonna find a job and be a productive adult and all these things. And so they find this arrangement where she's going to nanny for a widowed man in the community. And at first I thought this book was going to be very similar to In Good Company that I read, but it wasn't. This was a little different. Well, it was a lot different. First, it's an Amish community, and I'm finding that I really enjoy the wholesome of these Amish reads, and so I probably will at another time pick up the next book in the series that follows another one of their children, I think. So the mom cookie group is always in the background of the book, but it's going to focus on different characters, different children as the series continues. An audiobook that I picked up was Declutter Like a Mother, a guilt-free, no-stress way to transform your home and your life. This is by Allie Casazza. I think she has a podcast, she's got a blog, she's got all kinds of stuff, classes you could take. I picked up her audiobook and just kind of listened to it, ironically, as I was cleaning and doing dishes, things like that. That's when I try to listen to audiobooks, just so that I can have something kind of in my ear and make those duties go faster. But this book I felt like had a lot of advice that was easy to follow, but also if you have been in the decluttering kind of cleaning, if you've read any kind of books, some of the advice may be repetitive. There are some nuggets in there though tips and things that I hadn't heard of before and that we did kind of implement. And Ellie is the narrator of this book, so the author is the narrator of the audiobook, and it just felt like it was a girlfriend that you were sitting down with talking to, and she was like a no judgment, here's what works for me, maybe I hope it works for you too kind of vibe. So I really enjoyed this book. As an audiobook, like I said, I just kind of listen to them in the background. I try not to pick too heavy of books when I'm listening to audiobooks because I'm multitasking a lot of times, but if you're looking for something, like I said, that just sounds like maybe a girlfriend's having you over for a drink and you are discussing how you can tidy up your house, this is a good book for you. The next books that I read were actually books off my shelf, so I'm super proud that I read books that I already owned, but they were mostly rereads. I have read a lot of the books from this series before, years ago, talking a lot of years, like before I even met my husband, I think. I checked out some of these books from the library when I was in this weird stage where I couldn't figure out what I wanted to read. A lot of the young adult books I was reading. I don't feel like there was that many. There's just, it was a transition time in my reading. I don't know. Let me know if you can relate. But there was these periods of times where you went through where you were just transitioning and becoming a different reader, looking for different things. And so I think that's what was happening is I was trying to figure out what I wanted to read next, and I was having a really hard time figuring out. I came across these books. It is a long series. It is the Elm Creek Quilts series. So this is by Jennifer, Chiaverini, maybe? I'm sure somebody's gonna let me know I did that wrong. But I have these books. This was actually when I organized the shelf behind me. This is the books that take up the whole top shelf. And I usually don't have the dust jacket on them. I took them off because I just like the way they look better up there. But this first book here actually has the first 3 books of the series in it. And so I started with the first book, Elm Creek Quilts, and then went on to Round Robin, and the third one is the Cross Country Quilters. Let me see if I can kind of wrap up these books without making this like an hour-long video. The Elm Creek Quilts series follows quilters. The book's series starts by introducing you to Sylvia and Sarah. And Sarah and Matt are a young couple that move to Sylvia's town, and Sylvia has actually been away for many, many years. She and her sister were estranged, and she moved out of Elm Creek Manor and only came back when her sister passed and there were no other relatives left. So Sylvia comes back with the intent to clean up the manor and get it prepared to sell. And Sylvia and Matt come to help her. Matt is a landscape artist, and so he comes, and then seeing that Sylvia needs a lot of help in the home preparing it, and that his dear wife Sarah is having a hard time finding a job in town, offers Sarah to help Sylvia in the meanwhile. So Sylvia understands that Sarah is still interviewing. She's an accountant, and she's still interviewing, but in the meantime, she's working for Sylvia. When we first meet Sylvia, she is an older, very grouchy, very set in her ways lady, and Sarah is not pleased to be working with her, and just it seems like a bad match. But of course, as the story goes on, Sarah and Sylvia become better friends, and you start to unearth a lot of the stories that happen at Elm Creek Manor. Sylvia is a quilter and begins to teach Sarah how to quilt. I don't quilt, and I still find these books so endearing. These are not necessarily Christian-based books. They are secular books, but they are clean reads. And like I said, I just find these stories so endearing. Most of them are rereads, but it had been so long since I read them originally. I think that I was able to read them again, and I could see myself another time picking them up and reading them even for a 3rd or 4th time. So I really enjoyed these books. The first one has to do with Sarah and Sylvia and unearthing that the mysteries of the manor and things like that, and just hearing more about Sylvia's story, why she left, and just the background of that, and then watching the manor unfold and be tidied, and just preparing it. In the second book, Round Robin, we follow the same kind of set of characters, we follow more of the characters introduced in the first book, and they decide they're going to create a round robin quilt, which is a quilt where each one of them makes a piece of the quilt, and then they come together and put it together. And so as each person is making their portion of the quilt, we learn a little bit more about their stories and some of the trials that they're facing at this point in their life. The third book, The Cross Country Quilters, actually follows some of the quilters that come to this quilt camp. There is a group of ladies that you meet, and they come to Quilt Camp, which is a week-long camp where you learn either where brand new beginners can learn how to quilt, or if you're a seasoned quilter, you can pick up more skills and things like that. And there is friendship and just fun to be had. It sounds like such a fun time. It's kind of like summer camp for adult quilters. So the ladies go, and you meet these different ladies. One is an older actress whose show is about to be canceled, and she needs to learn how to quilt in order to land the role in this other movie, or keep the role in this movie. Another woman is a younger woman who is a single mom. And then we meet Vinny, who is an older woman who comes to camp. She comes to camp every year to celebrate her birthday because she had been recently widowed and decided that she wanted to spend her birthday surrounded by lots of people having fun. And she felt like quilt camp was the best thing to do. And so we meet these ladies and how their lives interact with each other, how they meet at camp, and how friendship begins. And then it follows their stories, and there is some really serious stuff that happens in this book. So there is some spousal abuse. If that is something that you are sensitive to, please be forewarned that that is discussed in this book. I did take a little break from reading Elm Creek because, like I said, I was reading this and it was 3 books in one, which at the time of purchase just seemed like such a bargain. So much so that I bought another multiple book in one. So because these are so giant, and this is what I've started reading at night instead of digital books, yeah, it's hard to tote this around with you. But I took a little break and then I ended up picking up this book, which would be 4 through 6. And so this one is the Elm Creek Quilts album, and there are 3 more novels, it says in here. This one, the novels are the Runaway Quilt, the Quilters Legacy, and the Master Quilter. So I only, in the month of February, finished the Runaway Quilt and the Quilters Legacy. The Runaway Quilt digs back deeper and is more of a historical fiction. It has a dual timeline. So you are following Sylvia, which is the owner of Elm Creek Manor. You're following her and she's learning more about her family. She's been told that her family was part of the Underground Railroad, and as she digs in deeper, she's trying to unearth if that story is true or if in fact they could be related to slave owners. Sylvia is really upset by this and has a lot of pride in her family traditions and her family legacy, and so she is just grappling with the stories that she's heard versus what she's finding out. And so her friends kind of gather around her and try to help her unearth things and find out what really happened. We also, like I said though, this is a dual timeline, so it'll go back from Sylvia in her present day and back to when these events actually took place. Some of the things that we as a reader learn, Sylvia is not aware of. This book in the series is really good. It is really emotional, as you can imagine, because it does talk about owning slaves, runaway slaves. It goes into when the war broke out, the Civil War, and how neighbors turned on neighbors and just the ugliness of it all. And so it is a really good read though, but if that's something that is difficult for you to read, you may want to skip that one. The next book, The Quilters Legacy, talks more about Sylvia's mom, and Sylvia's mom has married into the Bergstrom family. Sylvia Bergstrom it's the Bergstrom legacy. They're the ones that created Elm Creek Manor, built it from bottom up, and so Sylvia's mom marries into this family, and Sylvia realizes she doesn't really know that much about her mom and her past. And in this Quilters Legacy, we kind of learn why. Sylvia is learning more and more about her mom, and we as the reader get to learn more about her because this one is also a dual timeline, and we get to flash back to when the events were taking place and as Sylvia's present day. Sylvia is trying to track down some of the quilts that her mom made because her sister, who has passed, sold off a lot of the family quilts, and Sylvia really wants to get these back. And so with help from her friends, of course, she starts a mission to try to track down some of these quilts, and with each quilt there is a special story that has to do more and more with her mom. This also is an emotional read. The book does touch on the Spanish flu and that epidemic that happened, and it talks about war. There is wartime, and so those are some things that you may want to be aware of in there as well. I have just started the Master Quilter, so I haven't finished it yet, and this one is about Sylvia and her wedding. And so that's this last portion here. I've just started it. I think I'm just on chapter 4 of that one, but this is a big chunky book too, which is why I had to take in between them. I think the next book I did buy a multiple book in books again. I'm telling you, I just thought it was a great budget find, but now I'm finding those are hard to read. I just finished reading What If Love Is the Point by Carlos and Alexa Penavega. If you don't know who they are, Carlos is best known for being on Big Time Rush, I think is the name of the group he was involved in, and then Alexa played Carmen in Spy Girls, and that's how Spy Kids. That's where the familiarity for me came in. I watch Spy Kids, and kids love Spy Kids. And I watched their YouTube when they were putting out videos and getting to know them a little bit more. I followed them when they did Dancing with the Stars. And this book was my kids are okay, I promise. They're just goofing off in the background. This is a short read. I ended up reading it in just like 2 days. I probably would have finished it in one, but I started it in the evening hours and needed to sleep. But if you are fans of them, or even if you don't know them, this is a quick little read, a quick journey into their background. It just lightly touches on a lot of things, so it doesn't dive deep into too much, but it covers a lot of ground. It talks about their spiritual journeys individually and then together as they came together as a married couple. And the last chapter really packs a punch. It is so good. I really enjoyed this book. I give it 4.75 stars. And in fact, I may go back on and just change it to 5 because it was such a sweet, light read. I think I went down a little because I wanted more information on them, but because I am fans of them. So, but if you're looking for a quick, light read, I would highly recommend this book. It was so good. And I read this book cover to cover. I read the preface, the preface. I read the acknowledgments. Like, I read it all. So, really, really love it. Can't say it enough. So, I'm going back, since I've said I loved it so many times, going back into Storygraph to change it to 5 stars. But there's that book. And then 2 more digital books that I picked up were Sunset Summer. This is part of the Love on Summer Break series. I had read the first book of the series in January, I believe. So Sunset Summer has to do with another one of the characters in the book. This one has with one of the side characters, the supporting characters in the first book, her younger sister. So we do briefly meet her in the first book, and this just talks of her story a little bit more. Her and her sister, her older sister, is more of a party animal. She's a little more wild and out there, and her younger sister, it just kind of tries to keep her in check as best she can and tries to protect her in her own way. This story had some points that were close to home for me. It talks about how she just really wanted her older sister to like her and to be her friend, and there were she couldn't understand what was happening in her sister's life that just kept making her want to act out and not care for her parents' rules. They go to a party and they get in trouble, and the younger sister also gets in trouble, and so the parents ship the younger sister off to live with her grandparents in a smaller town to kind of get her back on track at this point. But to this point, she's always kind of been the good girl. And at this small town that she is sent to with her grandparents, she meets Will. Will seems like a bad boy, but underneath it all, there's a lot more happening there, and we follow their story. This book does deal with substance abuse. It also deals with suicide attempts, so be warned about those things. The next book in the series, Big Wild Summer. This series, I don't think I said, is by Stephanie J. Scott. So this third book has to do, again, with another character. This one follows Elena, and I don't know if that's how the author meant to pronounce her name, but that's my name, so that's how we're going to pronounce it. She is getting what she thinks is her dream job for the summer with her longtime crush. But at the very beginning of the book, there's a prank that happens, and it happens from somebody who she thought was her friend. And so we have to find out what happened with this girl, why she suddenly is not Elena's friend. She just kind of keeps alluding that she should know what she did. Elena has no idea what happened, and she tries to ask her multiple times, and so we follow that kind of side story. But also what happens at the prank is Elena ends up getting in trouble at work and is sent to kind of like the castaway side of the amusement park, and this is where they deem the losers, and it's the not cool side of the park. And so she has to go there and work there for the summer. And she is afraid to quit or find another job because she's desperately trying to prove to her mom and her stepdad that she can be responsible. In this story, we find out more about who her crush really is and who he is as a person. We find out, of course, more about these like castaways and so-called losers on the park on the other side of the park, and then eventually we do find out what happened with their friendship and where it went wrong. I thought this was another great book in the series. It was a really sweet, light read. There is another book, I believe, in the series, but I've put that series off for now because, as you can see, I've just got all kinds of series books going on. Okay, so that is all the books that I read for the month of February. I have no idea where March is heading out to be. I kind of don't do TBRs. I've started seeing this piles of possibilities, which is a really cool idea because I'm very much a mood reader. So I just pick up what I want to read. I do have some books that are on hold at the library that I'm about to pick up today. So maybe we'll make a piles of possibility video. We'll see. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and wrapping up my February. Let me know how your February reading went. If you have any book recommendations, always leave them down below. Always looking to add to my TBR list. And as always, if you don't know, or if you just need to be reminded, may be the one to tell you, you are deeply and truly loved and so, so appreciated. Honestly, I really appreciate you taking your time out and spending it here with me. Thanks so much for hanging out with me.